Man, don't you appreciate our worship community? My goodness. Hey, glad those lessons paid off, mate. Gave you everything. Trying, You'll get there. You'll make it, Luke's so good. He's the best. Well, my name's Dylan, and I'm excited to share with you this morning. It's sunny outside, and so that means that we get to begin to start getting out of hibernation and start thinking about, maybe enjoying the great outdoors. But you made it to church this morning, and we're glad that you made it. We've been on a series called Culture Matters. Culture Matters. Have you been enjoying this series? I've been really enjoying this series just because it's just so pertinent to where we are at, that whether we realize it or not, culture has an effect on us. Whether you walked in here and a Christian, or whether you kind of came to church, a friend invited you and you don't know who this Jesus is, or this is kind of a new environment for you. What we don't realize is that culture plays an effect on every single one of us in the room, whether we realize it or not. And in America today, we would live in what's called a postmodern society. Not that we're not modern, but that it's post-Christian values, that the majority of people's thoughts and thinking is not stemming from a Christian, Judeo belief system or ethic, that we've kind of progressed past that. And so as a believer, or maybe somebody checking out church, why is it that what God's called us to do, why is it still relative to today? Last time I checked, people still need hope. Last time I checked, people still need answers. Last time I checked, as great as humanity can be, we still have serious problems that Jesus is the only one who can address. And so this series, Culture Matters, is causing us to look at that we're not supposed to shrink back from culture, that we're not supposed to isolate ourselves from culture, but that we actually have the ability to not just survive, but thrive in it. In fact, there's a diagram that we've been looking at, if we could throw it up on the screen, that when it comes to culture, this is kind of where most people take a stance, that they're one of two options. The first stance is this idea of separatism, that maybe you're a Christian in this room and you've encountered Jesus, and the notion is that, like, let me separate myself from the world. Like, I encountered truth and I encountered this God, and so let me separate myself from influences that might damage me or hurt me or that contradict my belief system, and because of fear, I'm going to withdraw myself from the world. The problem with that kind of belief system is, last time I checked, truth is what sets people free. So if people don't have truth, people can't be free. And so because I experienced freedom, God didn't cause the church to isolate itself. That God didn't cause us as the church to remove ourselves from society, because what happens is that you have a lot of content, you have answers, but no relationship. Therefore, you don't have any impact. But then we go to the other side of the coin, and there's this notion of syncretism, that when it comes to my belief system, because I want to engage culture, because I want to influence culture, what might I do? Well, when it comes to how I engage, let me relinquish truth so that I can fit in. I don't withdraw out of fear, but I compromise trying to fit in. And so when it comes to truth, let me give you a watered down version of it, because I don't want to offend somebody. I don't want to give you truth because it might cause me to stick out a little bit. When you're in your workplace, it's like, I don't want to be different. Or maybe if people found out the truth, they might actually persecute you. And so what we have is this notion of syncretism. Let me just water down my belief system so I can fit in. The good news is that's relationally heavy. It's like we connect with people. The problem is when you engage relationally, you have nothing to offer them, because there's nothing different about your life and theirs. And this whole Culture Matters is, how are we supposed to engage in culture? It's somewhere in the middle. It's called becoming a creative minority, if we could throw up this definition on the screen. And this is what it simply means. It's a community of believers who live out God's story the way Jesus showed them, for God's glory and the good of the culture that we participate in. And so we've been on a series called Culture Matters, looking at the life of Daniel, because when you read the Bible, you realize that God is not up in arms about culture, that God is not up in heaven like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. Didn't see that coming, That's not the God that we serve. That when you read the Bible, you actually realize that God interjects the church consistently throughout history to be the change that culture needs. You look at the nation of Israel, that they were supposed to influence the nations around them. And we're actually looking at the life of Daniel as an individual, how he was intersected in the middle of culture and had the ability to transform it. That our goal is not just to survive. Our goal is to thrive. I love how Gareth even said it the first week, that it's actually a great opportunity for God to be magnified and glorified. And so if you have your Bibles, we're going to read one passage, and then we're just going to dive into it. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, probably one of the more famous passages about the life of Daniel. And Daniel's been taken in captivity. He's been brought by Nebuchadnezzar into a culture that's not conducive to Christian belief systems. We pick up this story because today I want to look at how do we not just survive, but how do we thrive in the environment that we find ourselves in. Daniel 1, verse 8, here we go. But Daniel resolved that he would not. Man, that just triggered some people. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself, and God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. Next slide. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. Why should he see that you're in worse condition than the other youths that are your own age? So you would endanger my own head with the king. And Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servant for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat, water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you. Deal with your servant according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter, tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. When we read the life of Daniel, we see a story of an individual who is placed in a culture that's not conducive to his belief system, but he has the ability to affect it. You see, whether you came in here as a believer or not, culture has an effect on us. Oftentimes, culture affects us, and we don't even see or feel the effects of culture on our lives. Growing up in Australia, my dad taught me surfing, and so growing up surfing at the beach, you begin to learn that the ocean, as fun as it is to play in the ocean can be a really dangerous place to be. And so one of the first things my dad taught me when we were going surfing was that when you paddle out past the breakers, the first thing that you do is you find a fixed point on the shore. You find something that's fixed, a tree, a post, because what that does is that fixed point helps identify where you're supposed to be, and it lets you know if you're beginning to drift, because when you're in the ocean, there's riptides in the ocean, there's undertows and undercurrents, and the problem with an undercurrent is that you don't realize its effects on you until it's pulled you where you're not supposed to be. The problem with the current surfing is that it'll pull you into a space that actually could damage or hurt you, that's not conducive for you, and so you have a fixed point that shows you where you're supposed to be. And it's the same thing when it comes to culture, that the culture that we live in, when Gareth shared, culture is like water. You don't ask a fish to describe water. It's their environment. They can't see it. We can be so immersed in culture that we don't begin to see the effects of culture on our life. In fact, let me say it like this. The only way that you begin to feel the effects of culture on your life is when you begin to resist it. If you want to know how strong the wind is, you don't walk with the wind at your back. It's only when you turn into it, when you face the wind, that's the moment when you realize how strong it is. When it comes to culture, we don't realize the pull that culture has on us until we're put in a position where it contradicts our belief system, and now we have to face it. C.S. Lewis says it like this: no man knows how bad he is till he has tried to be very good. A silly idea that's current is that good people do not know what temptation means. This is an obvious lie. Only those who try to resist temptation know how strong it is. And when it comes to our life as believers, as a community called Manor House, God's caused us to engage in culture, not to shrink back, not to just simply blend in, but to engage culture, because we're not just going to survive, but we're going to thrive. That God has actually called our church for such a time as this. And when we look at the life of Daniel, he shows us how we can actually not conform to culture, but how we can transform the environment that we find ourselves in. And so if you're writing down notes and just taking a couple of thoughts just because you want to remember what I said, and if you don't want to remember, that's fine. We'll have somebody preach next week, and it'll be just as, it might be as good. If you're taking down notes, teasing. If you're taking down notes, this is the title of today's thought. Win from within. Win from within. Come on, would you bow your heads, close your eyes, and we're just going to pray that God is going to speak to every single one of us here, whether we know Jesus or not, whether we've been new to Christianity, whether we've been following God for a long time. Jesus, I thank you that you're here to speak to us. Jesus, I thank you that nothing surprises you. God, I thank you that you gave us your word to teach us more about you, how you can cause us to transform the environment that we're in because you're transforming us from the inside out. God, I pray if there's anybody here that doesn't know you, Jesus, I pray that they would taste how good you are, that what you have to offer satisfies what the world could never satisfy. God, I pray anybody here that's, God, distant or maybe struggling in their faith, God, I pray that you'd come alongside and strengthen them and encourage them this morning. Father, that greater is he that's in us than he that's in the world. God, for some of us that may have been walking with you for a long time, God, I pray that you give us eyes to see how we can engage in culture, God, that we're supposed to be right in the middle of it, affecting it, because they begin to see that there's an alternative, there's a better way to live. Father, I pray that you'd speak to us, every single one of us, front to the back, in your mighty name, and everybody said, when we read this passage, there's kind of three big ideas that I want to kind of just go through that we see in these few verses. The first one is we have to recognize that there's a tension that we face in culture. There's this tension that we face in culture because our culture and our Christianity clash at certain points. That's the first thing. Second thing is, how can culture change you? How does culture actually begin to change you? When we say culture, we have to understand that there's a power behind culture. Just like there's a power behind the culture in me, his name's Jesus, there's a power behind the culture that we face. How does culture actually transform and change your life? How does it change you for the negative? And lastly, how can our resolve change the culture that we're in? This passage says, the tensions that we face in culture, how culture can change us, and lastly, how we can change culture. When you read this story about Daniel, you recognize that Daniel was faced with a very real tension. And let me read it to you. This is what it says. Daniel resolved that he would not. Daniel resolved that he would not do certain things. That he said that there were certain things that I'm not going to allow in my life. I'm going to resolve not to do anything. Like that word resolve means to go in with a game plan. It means that he had a predetermined plan before he even got into the situation. That there was a lot of Jewish people that were taken. In fact, when you read the story of Daniel, that one statement is what causes Daniel to be Daniel, the Daniel that we actually read about. There was thousands of other Jewish people, young men that were taken. There was a lot of other young Jewish people in that community, yet it was Daniel, Hananiah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There we go, nailed it. There was a lot of other people that were taken, but it was these individuals that resolved not to do certain things that caused them to have influence. It caused them to grow in the king's authority, and it caused these guys. That statement is really what defines Daniel. That Daniel resolved not to do certain things. What does that word resolve mean? It means to go in with a game plan. It means to go in with a plan of action. I'm going to be honest with you because I have the microphone, and it'd be weird if I lied from you at church. It's just not something that we do. But I'm going to be honest with you. One of my greatest fears is getting into an environment with nothing to say. It's a fear that I have. I'm going to be really transparent too. I used to have this fear, this phobia of speaking in front of people. Like, I was the guy in class that my knees would knock. I was the person at McDonald's that wouldn't order from the clerk. I'd make my parents order for me. I don't know you. You're a stranger danger. I'm not going to talk to you because that's just, I just don't know you, and I'm nervous. And it really stems from this fear of not knowing like what to say. Like I have this fear, like one of my greatest fears is to stand in front of you and after like 3 minutes be like, well, that's church, Hope you're encouraged. Hope you feel great, and then let's have a great day. And some of you are sitting here this morning and you wish my message was 3 minutes. You're like, Dylan, that'd be fantastic. Give me the abbreviated version. Like I'd appreciate that, but not today. I've got another 30 minutes, so I'm going to use that time. Thank you very much. But one of my fears was not having something to say, so much so that when I first started dating Kirsten, I had this fear that I wasn't going to have anything to say. Like, I met Kirsten and I says, you look really pretty and I think I would like to get to know you more. And so would you happen to go grab dinner with me? And this was my fear as I'm getting ready for a date, that I'm going to be one of those guys sitting in the restaurant and just like looking at her with like a blank expression on my face. Like, people on first dates. Like, you see them all the time. They're like super nervous. They're playing on their phones. I didn't even have an iPhone that had something that would give me enough distraction, that warranted distraction. No, it was just me and Kirsten, and so you're going to laugh at me. But what happened was I would go into these dates. Sorry. I would go into these dates with like pre-written questions. I didn't want to just sit there and her to be thinking to herself, wow, pretty face, not much going on else upstairs, Did he really just compliment himself like that? Is he allowed to do that? I wanted her to think like there's some substance to this guy, I'm not all brawn, I'm not just all buff and brawn, good looking guy, I can have intellectually stimulating conversation. That's what I wanted her to think about me. And so I would go into these dates and I would have pre-written questions, making sure that they're open-ended, because you don't want just yes or no answers, because that's a conversation killer, Wow, did he really overthink the situation? I did, okay? And I would have open-ended questions because I wanted to make sure that we would have conversations. She'd go to the restroom, I'd pull out a little piece of paper and I'd be like, okay, I've got 3 good questions, okay, here we go. Let's have a date, let's get this awkward stuff out of the way. The reason why is because I had to go into that situation with a game plan because I didn't trust myself when I was actually in the situation. I didn't trust that I'd know the right thing to do when I was actually in it. You see, it says Daniel resolved that he went in with a game plan. That old adage, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, is so true. That if you don't go into culture with a game plan, if you don't have a resolve, if you don't already have a predetermined decision on what you're going to do, it's amazing how culture begins to cause you to drift because you don't have something fixed. It's only a matter of time before culture begins to pull you a certain way. And what happens is it says this. It says Daniel resolved that he would not do something. And in that statement, we find Christianity and culture begin to clash. Because the culture that we live in thinks of that statement, man, Daniel resolved that he would not. Daniel resolved that he would not be restricted, that he would not subject himself, that he subjected himself to some limitations. And this is what happens. Maybe you're new to church and this is your thought process. Oh, here we go. Preacher's he's going to get up and tell me all the things that I'm not allowed to do. Christians. Not allowed to go to the movies, You're not allowed to have fun. You serious? No, we don't do that. We're somber. We're mature. We drink coffee and that's it, Like that's people's perspective of Christianity. It's just a bunch of, in fact, sometimes you meet people and oh man, before I met Jesus, oh boy, my life, crazy, it was so much fun. I was doing this and I was doing that and I was at that party and it was crazy and it was oh my goodness, and then I met Jesus, Oh boy. And it's hard. Really suffering. Did your life really get worse after you met Jesus? But this is most people's perspectives of Christianity, that when it comes to Christianity, that belief system is just a bunch of don'ts. These are the things that you're not allowed to do because this clashes with culture. You see, one of our highest values in the culture that we live in is this notion called freedom. One of our highest values is that you as an individual are allowed to be free. You're free. That nobody gets to tell me what to do. That I get to do what I want, when I want, with whoever I want, because I am free. So when I read Daniel not doing something, experiencing some restrictions or limitations, are you kidding me? What an impingement on my rights. What a restriction. That's not a way to live. I would never live like that. And do you notice that there's a tension when it comes to culture? But let's think about this for a second. If your definition of freedom is that you are unrestricted, that you get to do whatever you want, when you want it, however you want. Have you ever thought about this? That if that's your definition of freedom, then actually nobody's free. If you think freedom means that I get to do whatever I want, when I want, with whoever I want, let's just break it down for a second. Then no one's free. Let me give you an example. I'm free. I live in America. I enjoy eating good food. And because I live in America, I can walk down the road that's Mexican. Oh, it's so good. You know what? There's Italian food. It's even better. I can have fast food. I can have slow food. I can eat whatever kind of food that I want, whatever suits my fancy. In fact, when it comes to my life, I don't have to go to the gym. I don't have to exercise. I can eat whatever I want, and I can exercise, schmexercise. You know what I'm saying? Who even needs that? I'm free. I'm gonna eat. I'm feeling like Chick-fil-A. It's Sunday. I can't even have Chick-fil-A. But you know what I mean? I feel like that, and I'm free. I get to eat whatever I want. And because you exercise your freedom over here, what you're going to experience down the road in your life is you're going to experience some serious limitation. That because I exercise freedom over here, now as I progress through life, physically, there's some things that I can't do. There's some things that are restricting on me. Because I exercise freedom over there, I'm going to experience some limitation over here. That it violates our notion of freedom. I'm not free to do whatever I want. My body can't keep up. Let me give you another example. I am free. I get to do whatever I want, with who I want, how I want. I'm my own man, you know? I can get into a relationship with whoever I want to. This whole value of only dating a Christian, how old-fashioned, archaic, you know? 18th century, not about that, you know? I can get in a relationship with whoever I want. I can figure out my own open-ended questions to sit down, thank you very much. And you're free. And so because you exercise your freedom, you said, I'm going to get into a relationship with whoever, whenever, however I want to. And what happens is you get into a relationship. And then all of a sudden, do you realize that you're no longer free? You expect me to tell you where I'm going to be on Monday night? Serious? No. I'm free. You don't get, no. I'm not allowed to hang out with whoever I want, when I want? Are you kidding me right now? Oh, I'm in a relationship with you. I'm not allowed to then get into a relationship with anybody else that upsets you. Are you serious? And do you recognize, because I experience I exercise my freedom over here, I experience limitation over here. When it comes to this definition of freedom, nobody lives like this. Nobody gets to do whatever they want, when they want, however you want. You just try it at work. You know, I'm just going to clock in when I feel like clocking in, you know? And you exercise that freedom, which you have that right. But then what's going to happen over here is you're going to experience a severe limitation when it comes to your financial situation. But because I exercise freedom over here, I experience limitation over here. Could it be that our definition of freedom is wrong? That freedom is not being able to do whatever I want, when I want, however I want it. Could freedom simply be exchanging certain freedoms over here for greater freedoms over here? When it comes to the life of Daniel, Daniel recognized that I'm going to allow some restrictions in my life because I'm going to experience some greater freedoms over here. We live in America. The reason why America is free is because somebody said, I'm going to limit my freedom and fight over here so that I can have certain freedoms over here for somebody else. When it comes to my fooding situation, I restrict some of my eating habits. Why? Because I recognize if I restrict myself over here, I'm going to experience greater freedom over there. When it comes to marriage, because I made a commitment to Kirsten and said, I do, by definition, I restricted my life to everybody else. What happened? I placed my life under certain restrictions in marriage. But what happened? It afforded me a greater dynamic and freedom in relationship, true vulnerability, true intimacy and openness, that I'm not worried if she's going to leave me. She's not worried if I'm going to leave her, that I can actually experience relationship. It's the way it's supposed to. And so when it comes to this society's notion of freedom, freedom is not being able to do whatever you want to do. Sorry, just one more. We have a police force to stop people from doing exactly that. You see, Daniel, it says that he resolved that he would not. He placed himself under certain limitations. Why? Because he recognized it would give me greater freedom down the road. That's what true freedom. In fact, Daniel, he would have read the Psalms, and this is what Psalms 119 says. Truly, I love your commandments more than gold, more than fine gold. Truly, I direct my steps by all your precepts. How do you fall in love with God's commandments and rules? You don't look at God's commandments as restrictive, which is what most people do. In fact, there's some people here in this room, you look at God's commandments as restrictive or limiting, not realizing that, God, if I actually submit myself to your commandments, it's going to open up greater freedoms for me down the road. And this is the tension that we face when it comes to culture. You see, Daniel faced the same tension that you and I face. But you see, why did Daniel experience and allow himself to be restricted in an area? Because he recognized that culture has the ability to change you and I. Culture has the ability to change you and I. Culture changes us by getting in us. Let me say it like this. Culture changes us by getting in us, by offering your appetites an alternative that doesn't satisfy. Now, I'll say that one more time. Culture changes you and I by offering an alternative to our appetites. It gets inside of us and it begins to change us from the inside out. Notice Daniel restricted himself in a specific area, and that was the area of his appetites. It says this, Daniel said, and he resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Daniel recognized that if I was going to eat what was put in front of me, that would be an infraction on my relationship with God, and I don't want anything getting in me that would stop me from having a relationship with God. That word defile means to spot. It means it means to cause to be dirty. That word defile means to be polluted. And Daniel recognized that I have an appetite, but if I put the wrong thing in me, what it's going to happen is it's going to cause a severance in my relationship when it comes to God. And I don't want to do that. Here's the problem, though. I don't know if any of you have ever recognized this, but everybody has to eat something. Everybody eats something. And Daniel had appetites just like everybody else. But what Daniel resolved was he wouldn't take what the world had to offer, because everybody has appetites. And what the world offers is an alternative that can never satisfy. When it comes to our appetite called love, our society is obsessed with this notion of love. And most of that obsession stems from this notion that love is a feeling, that if I can experience that, if I could have that, then I'll have this sense of love. But when it comes to this notion of love, we have an appetite for love. And so what happens, culture says this, you have an appetite for love, then what you need to do is, this is how we satisfy that. It's called lust. That because you're free, that you can have a relationship with whoever you want to, that you can do whatever you want to, that if you can have that sexual experience, then you'll experience what love is. And you go after satisfying that appetite, and you take and you eat the alternative, and what you find is it doesn't satisfy. That relationship that promised wholeness, man, he just left me hurting. What the world says when it comes to our appetites, we have this appetite for authority. It's a good thing. Like, authority is not a bad thing. God said, be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. Like authority is not a bad thing. What happens is the world says you have an appetite for authority. Hey, be satisfied by power. That the more I can control people, the more you can be in control, the more satisfied that you will be. And what you find is you begin to consume something that doesn't satisfy, because the more power that I have, it's never enough, because there's somebody always more powerful than myself. We have an appetite. We have an appetite for significance. In fact, scientists are telling us that there is like billions of universes all over the like out there, and like the far away, you know what I mean? And it's like we are the only like life forms right now that they can find. We're still looking. And in the grand, vast expanse of the universe, I exist. And we're looking for meaning, we're looking for purpose, we're looking for significance. And what culture says, if you're looking for significance, here, let me whet your appetite. It's called popularity. Because the more affection that you have, the more satisfied you'll be. The more likes you have on YouTube, the more people that are applauding you, the more followers on your channel, the more fame that you can acquire, it will quench your appetite for significance. And the problem is that we feed our appetites the wrong thing, and they don't satisfy. Because I had an appetite for love, and I did what culture said. I went into that relationship. I crossed those boundaries, and yet when I woke up in the morning, this person that I'm with, they never completed me. They never made me whole. Why is it that I still feel so lonely? This appetite for authority, it comes from God, because He gives us authority, because our authority is supposed to reflect God and God's ability to be in control. But I consume this thing called power, and I need to control people, and I need them to serve me, instead of recognizing my authority is to serve Him. And what happens? I'm turning into a person I never thought I'd be. I'm not helping people. I'm the one hurting them. Man, here we go. This idea of significance. That I have purpose and meaning, and I'm chasing this notion called popularity, that if I can just have more affection, then I'll be satisfied. That why is it that I got those likes? Why is it that everybody knows my name, yet I still feel so insecure? What culture is telling me to eat, it doesn't satisfy me. You see, what happens is we all have appetites. How culture begins to change us is it begins to get in us by offering an alternative that could never satisfy. Yet Daniel, he doesn't just show us the tension that we face. Daniel doesn't just show us how culture changes us. Daniel shows us how we transform culture, because this is what Daniel said. I'm going to resolve. I'm coming in with a plan not to put this thing into my body because it pollutes me, and that's what sin does. It pollutes you. That pollution causes you not to function the way that you're supposed to. The reason why we look at an environment that's polluted, we don't like it, it's not functioning the way it's supposed to. The reason why you don't put apple juice in your car is because you pollute your vehicle and now it doesn't function the way we're supposed to. That's what sin does to you and me. It begins to pollute us. It begins to cause us not to function the way we're supposed to. In fact, when it comes to sin, here we go. When it comes to sin, it causes us to think that God's angry with us. It causes us to think that God's distant from us. That's not what sin does. The reason why God hates sin is because it causes us to distance ourselves from God. Sin causes me to get angry and upset with God. It hardens my heart. And so Daniel said, I'm going to resolve not to put the wrong things in, but the problem is everybody eats. And here's what happens. How we begin to transform culture, you have to recognize that our job is not just simply to resist. No one is strong enough not to eat. You see, Daniel, if you're taking down notes, this is how Daniel began to transform culture. Daniel didn't just resist what culture had to offer. He replaced it with something that satisfied. Daniel, this is what it says. Test your servant for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink as the band comes to the platform. You see, Daniel didn't just simply say no. Let me say no to all the wrong things. You see, our belief system isn't just saying no to the wrong things. It's saying yes to the right things. Have you ever wondered why Jesus uses vernacular around the concept of food so much? In fact, Gareth did it so eloquently in communion when he said, this is my body, this is my flesh, this is my blood, eat and drink. Do you know why Jesus used those analogies? Because everybody has to eat. And everybody, when Jesus stepped into humanity, he recognized that culture is constantly trying to tell you what will satisfy you, but it only comes up short. And so Jesus showed up on the scene and he says, what you're looking for will be only found in me. I'm living bread. I'm living water. John 6 verse 34, Jesus said to them, I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. Could it be that what your soul and what your spirit is longing for, the world that we can see that's tangible, has nothing to satisfy it? Could it be that what you're desperate for is only found in the person of Jesus? I love this thought. It says this: if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. You see, how we transform culture is we win from within. We don't resist. We simply replace what the world has to offer with something that truly satisfies. Maybe you walked in here this morning, you're saying to yourself, Dylan, I look at my life, and as you're talking about pollution, I recognize that I bit down. I had an appetite for affection, and I bit down on something and it didn't satisfy me. I had an appetite for an experience. I thought if I could experience that, I gave into that substance, but it didn't satisfy. I had an appetite for significance, and I've been chasing affection, and I find insecurity. And maybe you walked in here this morning and you recognize there's some things that have gotten in my life that are polluting me. I'm not functioning the way I'm supposed to. The reason why we preach Jesus is because Jesus said, all you need is found in me. See, for some of you here today, God's not angry, upset with you. He wants relationship with you. In fact, this is what Jesus said. If you just ask me, I'll wash you white as snow. I'll make you clean. The shame and the guilt that you don't want anybody to see. Jesus this morning is saying, I'm the one that can truly satisfy you. Maybe you walked in here and you said, man, I've given my life to Jesus. I'm kind of new on this journey and I'm finding that I'm tired. Does anybody else get tired following Jesus? Anybody else? Man, it's hard to say yes to the right things. See, I gave my life to Jesus, Dylan, but my family doesn't understand. My work, that they don't understand. Notice what it said about Daniel. It said, Daniel, give me 10 days. For some of you, you're on day 2. I got a promise for you. There's a day 10 coming. Man, I gave my life to Jesus, and it's hard. People don't recognize what I'm sensing, but it's only a matter of time before they see it, and they begin to say, hey, what's different about you? What happened? I got to tell you, I found something to satisfy. I just even felt this morning that some of us that have walked in, we feel like life has been, in fact, this is the picture, that undertow. You've been fighting against the current, and all you've been doing is working. And God says, He says, I'm not here just to cause you to resist. I'm causing you to replace, that there's a better way. You know the best way to go surfing is a jet ski comes, picks me up. And I don't do any of the work. For some of you here, you've been resisting so long, maybe Jesus is saying, hey, would you let me just simply replace? Would you let me energize? Would you let me refill? Would you let me refresh? Because right now, the world hasn't noticed a difference, but day 10 is coming, and they're going to begin to say, man, something's different about you. How you act is better. How you talk is better. How your marriage is, how you're treating your spouse. There's something different. What you have, I need. Maybe you're here and you've been following Jesus what seems like your entire life. Can I encourage you? What you have, the world desperately needs. How are people supposed to taste and see how good God is? Because they need to taste and see how good your life is. And I'm not just saying because everything's going well, you're healthy, wealthy, and wise. But how good your life is going when it comes to your marriage. They look at your marriage and they say, man, you guys disagreed, but how come it doesn't cause disdain? Hey, you had a disagreement, but how come you don't put distance between yourselves? What is it about this relationship that's different? When it comes to your work environment, how is it that you have authority? How is it that you're in control, and yet why is it that you don't try and control me? Why is it that you can still be generous and benevolent in your position? Because I recognize my authority comes from God. I don't need to control you because God's in control. Why is it that you don't have the same insecurities? Why? Because I found significance. God created a whole lot and He wants relationship with me. I don't need your affection because I've got the one that matters the most. This is what my life has to offer. In Manor House Church, God has caused us not to step out of culture, but He's caused us to engage in culture. That what people desperately need to taste and see is you. Would you stand to your feet with me this morning as we close? Come on, with every head bowed and every eye closed, if you were to be honest this morning, you'd say, Dylan, I think you're talking to me. You walked in. You say, Dylan, I feel distance from God. I feel like I'm away from God. In fact, if you're going to be really honest, you say, Dylan, I think I opened myself up. I had some appetites and the wrong things got in. I'm looking for something to satisfy. I'm looking for something to fulfill me. What you're looking for is the person of Jesus. He said, I'm living bread, I'm living water. I'm what you're looking for. If you're here this morning, you say, Dylan, that's me. I need to give my life to Jesus. I'm running from Jesus, but I need a return. There's some pollution that I need Jesus to wash out of my life. With every head bowed, every eye closed, if that's you, I just want you to raise your hand. I just want to pray for you right where you're at. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Here we go. 1, 2. Anybody else? 3, 4, 5. Anybody else? Come on. 6. Awesome. 7. Anybody else? 8. More hands are going up. Say, man, I need Jesus back in my life. I tried to find satisfaction outside of Him. More hands, more hands. Come on. Awesome. You can put them down. We're going to pray in just a moment. For the rest of us, I felt like even as us as a church to just recommit. That God's caused us to be here, not to remove ourselves, but to engage now more than ever, because what you have is what the world needs. Greater is He that's not in Dylan or Pastor Walter or Pastor Mark. Greater is He that's in you than he that's in the world. We're going to sing this song from the depths, and then we're going to pray, and we're going to allow God to do what he does. This is just simply a moment to respond. Maybe the Holy Spirit put his hand on an area of your life. Maybe God's been saying, hey, here's an area of course correction. Maybe you're giving your life to Jesus. We're going to dim the lights and just simply say, God, would you encounter me? That you're going to meet with me right here in this place. You're going to speak to me. You are life, and what I need comes from you. Come on, we're going to sing.